Just moments before the world changed, a quiet whisper from behind palace doors hinted at something far greater than scandal. Prince William, long seen as the dependable heir, was about to step into a storm of his own making. What he revealed in the final hour would leave the monarchy shaken, and the royal line forever altered. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. It began as a low murmur in the hallways of Kensington Palace, an unnamed aide spotted rushing toward the East Wing, clutching a folder sealed with the royal insignia. That alone would not have stirred alarm. But within the hour, 5 more senior aides were seen quietly assembling inside the Queen's private conference room, eyes darting, lips tight. It wasn't protocol, it was panic. Something had shifted, and the tension in the air was unmistakable. Those who knew the inner workings of the royal machine could sense it. William had summoned an emergency meeting, unlisted on any official schedule, and not a single member of the press had been alerted. Inside those stone walls, William sat alone for nearly 2 hours. Advisors waited outside, visibly confused and growing more restless by the minute. Rumors began to swirl. Some whispered of a health crisis. Others murmured about a pending abdication. But none of them came close to the truth. What William was preparing to do went far beyond the boundaries of royal duty. It was personal. It was irreversible. And it would not be discussed, it would be declared. Palace insiders, speaking only under conditions of absolute anonymity, claimed embargoed documents had been printed, sealed, and then locked away under direct order from William himself. The only hint of their contents came from a brief conversation overheard between 2 royal aides, one of whom was reportedly heard saying, "He's rewriting everything." What exactly William was rewriting remained unknown, but the sense of dread only intensified. In a monarchy built on tradition and silence, such defiance was a warning shot. Those closest to William had seen it building for months, an erosion of his faith in the royal way. While he had long played the role of the loyal successor, the dutiful son, something inside him had fractured. Some say it began the day he read his mother's sealed letter, words she had written in secret, long before her untimely death. Others point to his growing frustration with the firm's refusal to modernize. But wherever the crack began, it had now widened into a chasm. William was no longer looking for reform. He was planning something far more dramatic. Outside the palace, conflicting reports began to surface. Was William preparing to exile himself? To step aside entirely? Or worse, was he planning to expose the family's most dangerous secrets? Media outlets scrambled to get the scoop, but the truth was still locked behind closed doors. Even his closest allies didn't know what decision had been made, only that it would not be reversed. William had gone silent, and in his silence, the monarchy began to tremble. But no one inside those palace walls could have predicted that William's decision wasn't just about power. It was about legacy, loyalty, and one final betrayal. As the monarchy watched nervously, William met with someone no one expected, an estranged royal advisor with secrets buried deep in the Windsor vault. What they discussed would shatter centuries of protocol and force William into the most dangerous promise of his life. The meeting was not scheduled. It wasn't on any palace calendar, and no aide escorted the visitor in. But for those who still remembered the scandal surrounding the former royal advisor, once exiled for breaking protocol during the final years of Diana's life, their sudden return was more than suspicious. William didn't tell anyone where he was going that evening. He simply disappeared. When he returned, something in him had changed. The reserved prince who once avoided direct confrontation with the firm was gone. In his place stood a man visibly carrying the weight of knowledge, dangerous, forbidden, and deeply personal. According to palace insiders who later leaked fragments of the encounter, the advisor had brought with him more than just memories. He had kept a collection of private recordings, voice notes dictated by Diana in her most vulnerable moments, many of which had never been shared with the public, nor the family. Some were meant to be protection, others, warnings. All were damning. William listened to them in silence, reportedly refusing to pause or speak until they were finished. He was hearing his mother in a way he never had before, strategic, terrified, and unrelenting in her belief that the system surrounding her sons would eventually consume them. But it wasn't the tapes that broke him. It was the envelope. yellowed with age, sealed in wax, and marked in elegant handwriting for William only. No one knows exactly how long the advisor had held on to it, or why he chose this exact moment to hand it over. But what was written inside reportedly left William pacing the room for nearly an hour. That letter was not simply emotional, it was a blueprint. A strategy laid out in Diana's own words for how one of her sons could one day dismantle the very structure that had trapped her. William, long bound by duty and silence, was now being asked to choose between honoring the institution and honoring the woman who had died trying to escape it. In the days that followed, William grew colder. Meetings were canceled, royal appearances postponed. He became increasingly reclusive, speaking only to a select few. Rumors emerged that he had made a promise to the advisor, to his mother, and to himself. If the monarchy did not change by a specific date, if the system continued to ignore the warnings Diana had tried to leave behind, then he would act. It would not be symbolic. It would not be subtle. It would be the kind of move that could never be undone. But even William's carefully calculated pact couldn't prepare him for the ticking time bomb buried within his own bloodline. For years, the future of the crown rested on young Prince George's shoulders, but a devastating truth long kept hidden now risks derailing everything. What William uncovered about his own son sent shockwaves through the monarchy and forced a father to make a heart-wrenching choice. It began with a file William was never meant to read. Locked away in the royal archives under a restricted classification, it had been quietly compiled over years: medical assessments, psychological evaluations, confidential notes from private consultants. All of it revolved around George. William had been told his son was fine, just highly sensitive. But buried deep in those pages was a chilling pattern. A series of red flags ignored. A diagnosis that had never been fully spoken aloud. A secret genetic marker that mirrored something Diana herself once feared ran through the bloodline. The firm had known. And they had chosen silence over support. William felt his world split in two. He couldn't help but recall the stories his mother had once whispered about her own suspicions, her own cries for help, and how the institution dismissed her as unstable instead of listening. That history, once distant, now came crashing back with brutal clarity. The same icy hands that once tightened around Diana were now reaching for her grandson. George, still too young to understand the full weight of the crown, had already become its prisoner. Behind the palace gates, he was being shaped into a symbol, polished, protected, paraded, but never truly seen. The moment Catherine learned the truth, everything cracked open. In a heated confrontation behind the royal infirmary's closed doors, she demanded answers no one was willing to give. Her voice, usually composed and cautious, broke through with unfiltered fury. "He's our son, not your heir," she cried, "and you will not treat him like a product." But the royal doctors, bound by tradition and hierarchy, offered only one response. "We must protect the crown, not the child." It was then that William knew something irreparable had occurred. The system he'd once been groomed to lead had no intention of evolving. It would rather crush the soul of a child than adapt for his well-being. In that moment, William made his choice. He wasn't just a prince, he was a father. And he would no longer allow the machine to dictate the destiny of his family. To the horror of the senior royals, he began pulling George from engagements, rejecting traditional schooling paths, and refusing psychological reshaping initiatives secretly pushed by the firm. Those around him warned that his actions would be interpreted as rebellion. He didn't care. His vow was absolute. "I will not sacrifice my son to the system," he told Catherine in private. And from that point forward, everything changed. But protecting his son meant going against the very institution that raised him, something the firm would never forgive. Behind every powerful man is a woman with her own war to fight. As William moved to protect their son, Catherine faced her own battle, one that would pit her against Queen Camilla in a ruthless, silent war for influence and survival. The throne may have been a symbol of tradition, but within the palace walls, power shifted with every glance, every silence, every calculated gesture. With King Charles stepping back due to health concerns, Camilla wasted no time stepping in. But it wasn't just ceremonial. Whispers began circulating that Camilla had quietly assumed control over key operations inside the firm restructuring staff, limiting access to decision-making meetings and subtly repositioning herself as the de facto gatekeeper of the crown. And Catherine, once seen as the monarchy's shining jewel, now found herself sidelined, suffocated by an agenda that seemed designed to contain her rather than elevate her. It began with small things: invitations rescinded, press appearances reshuffled, staff who once worked under Catherine reassigned without explanation. The change was gradual, precise, a slow erosion of presence disguised as coincidence. But Catherine saw through it. She warned William in hushed tones over late-night discussions that something was being orchestrated. "They're isolating us," she said, bit by bit, "and soon we won't have a place left at the table." At first, William tried to assure her it was politics, nothing more. But deep down, he knew. This wasn't strategy. It was sabotage. In public, the tension between Catherine and Camilla was veiled behind smiles and scripted gestures. But to those who understood the language of power, the battle was obvious. At one state event, Camilla subtly repositioned herself to block Catherine from photographers. At another, she interrupted Catherine mid-speech with a comment disguised as humor, but laced with condescension. These moments, while seemingly benign, sent shockwaves through royal watchers and palace aides alike. Lines were being drawn, and allegiances were shifting. Behind closed doors, staff whispered of an invisible war, where choosing the wrong side could mean exile or worse, irrelevance. Catherine, however, did not retreat. She fought back in the only way she knew how, with unwavering grace, strategic silence, and quiet assertion of her role as mother, wife, and future queen. But it didn't go unnoticed. Senior royals began accusing her of defiance, of stepping outside the bounds of what was expected. One evening, during a private dinner, a confrontation erupted. A senior royal, emboldened by Camilla's rise, reportedly challenged Catherine's judgment, implying she was allowing emotion to cloud her role. What followed was a sharp, unapologetic response that stunned the room into silence. Catherine, tired of being managed, had finally spoken her truth. She would not be reduced to a symbol of silence. Not anymore. And just as tensions reached breaking point inside the palace, the world outside caught wind of William's intentions and chaos erupted. It only took one leak. One classified memo mysteriously sent to the press. Within minutes, global headlines screamed of a royal revolution. William's plan, once hidden in shadows, was now out in the open, and the monarchy was on the brink. The memo wasn't signed, but there was no mistaking the source. It bore the royal seal, the distinct phrasing of internal protocol, and above all, the unmistakable tone of a man at war with his own inheritance. The content sent shockwaves through the press. A draft declaration authored by Prince William himself, outlining a radical vision for the monarchy's future. In it, he questioned the sustainability of the traditional line of succession, proposed reforms that would transfer ceremonial roles into public service programs, and hinted at the possibility of stepping aside if it meant protecting his family. The language was defiant, sharp, and deliberate. This wasn't just a critique, it was a blueprint for dismantling the system from within. As soon as the story broke, Buckingham Palace erupted into chaos. Phones rang without pause, aides scrambled to issue statements, and corridors once lined with order became frenzied with speculation. A curt press release was dispatched within the hour denying the memo's authenticity, but the damage had already been done. The public, long starved for transparency, wasn't interested in denials. They wanted truth. They wanted fire. And this leak gave them both. News outlets ran continuous coverage, dissecting every line of the document. Experts debated whether William had lost faith in the throne or whether he was positioning himself to save it. Outside the palace gates, the public reaction was instant and combustible. Crowds formed outside Kensington Palace and Clarence House, waving banners that read, "Let him lead and break the line." At first they were peaceful. By nightfall they were chanting. The institution hadn't seen this level of unrest since Diana's death. But this time, the storm wasn't over grief. It was over revolution. The hashtag William the Breaker trended worldwide within hours, capturing a generational divide that had long been simmering. Young Britons, once apathetic toward the crown, were now vocal and mobilized. For them, William wasn't betraying tradition, he was finally standing against it. Inside royal circles, panic was reaching a fever pitch. Senior members of the firm went silent, canceling all scheduled public appearances. Trusted palace insiders were reassigned, and legal teams were reportedly deployed to trace the source of the leak. But the truth was, damage control had come too late. The world had seen the memo. The illusion of control had shattered. And worse, the leak had exposed more than a single man's plan. It revealed a deep fracture within the royal family itself. Lines had been crossed, sides taken, and now every move forward would be under scrutiny. But even as the press devoured every rumor, only those inside the palace knew the full extent of William's decision, and who he would choose to stand beside him. For decades, William and Harry were seen as the brothers who would modernize the monarchy. But in a private showdown behind palace doors, years of betrayal, grief, and silence exploded into a final heartbreaking confrontation. William had avoided the meeting for as long as he could. The silence between them had become a wall built from old pain and quiet resentment. But with everything unraveling, there was one conversation that could no longer be postponed. He extended the invitation through a private channel. No aides, no press, no protocols. Just the two brothers, behind closed doors, where everything that had been buried for years would finally surface. The air was heavy when Harry arrived, but the tension didn't wait. It cracked open the moment their eyes met. There was no small talk, no illusion of peace, only a lifetime of unfinished sentences ready to be spoken. William began with her, Diana, the mother who had begged for unity, who had warned of the institution's darkness, who had clung to the hope that her sons would not just survive the firm, but transform it. He spoke of her letters, her voice recordings, her fears. He told Harry that much of what she predicted had come true. But when he spoke of protecting the legacy she left behind, Harry interrupted with anger, not sorrow. He accused William of standing by as the crown destroyed everything he'd built with Meghan. "You let them crucify us," Harry said. "You chose silence when we needed your voice." And in that moment, the years of royal formality dropped away. They were no longer heirs, they were brothers, bleeding truth. William didn't deny the accusation. Instead, he revealed his own torment, that he had kept quiet because the cost of defending Harry would have been catastrophic for Catherine, for the children, for the fragile balance holding the monarchy together. "I kept secrets to protect you," he said, voice shaking with a mix of guilt and exhaustion. But the damage had already been done. Harry, hardened by exile and media war, could no longer hear the nuance. For him, the wound was still fresh, still bleeding. And William's words, however sincere, came far too late. Then came the moment that shattered the last remnants of hope between them. William made it clear. In his new vision for the monarchy, Harry would not be included. Not in title, not in duty, not in future. "You've built your own path," he said, "and now I must build mine." It wasn't said with cruelty, but with finality. A line drawn not just in blood, but in purpose. And when Harry left that room, the door didn't close, it slammed, echoing down the corridors of legacy and loss. Later that evening, a leak surfaced from someone close to Meghan. A single line that ricocheted through headlines and social feeds within hours. We always knew. It wasn't a denial. It was a confirmation. That even from afar they had seen the fracture coming. That what had once been a bond of unity was now an unspoken feud with no end in sight. As one brother walked away for good, William turned to the only person he now trusted to carry the crown's future on his own terms. In the most televised royal broadcast since the Queen's coronation, Prince William stepped forward with a proclamation unlike any in Windsor history. With one speech, he rewrote the royal legacy and left the world gasping in disbelief. No one knew what he was going to say. The announcement was made with just a few hours' notice, the royal seal affixed to a cryptic statement promising a message from the future. As the world tuned in, silence gripped the United Kingdom. Then William appeared not as the heir apparent, not as a man tethered to centuries of unwritten rules, but as a leader unchained, determined to pull the monarchy out of its shadows. He wasted no time. His tone was calm, but the weight of his words struck like thunder. In the opening minutes, he declared the beginning of a new royal order, one where succession would no longer be dictated by bloodline alone, but by one's service to the people. The implication was unmistakable. The throne would never again be passed simply by birthright. Then came the moment that stole the air from the room. William announced that Prince George, his firstborn, would not be required to ascend the throne. Instead, George would be given the freedom to choose his own path without the pressure of a crown waiting for him. The statement cut through the heart of centuries of tradition. For the first time, a royal heir was being offered liberation from the destiny carved into his name. William's voice did not waver. "We do not inherit leadership," he said. "We earn it." But he wasn't done. He turned his sights to the monarchy's foundation, the finances. William invited Parliament to conduct a full review of royal entitlements, tax structures, and expenditures, urging them to hold the crown to the same standards as the people it serves. Then, in a sweeping move that stunned even his closest advisors, he formally dissolved the secret royal council, a shadowy body that had long operated behind palace doors, influencing decisions from the throne room to Parliament. Its end signaled not just a change in power, but a purge of the old guard that had resisted reform at every turn. He continued, each word a strike against the stone of tradition. William pledged absolute transparency, moving forward, publishing detailed records of royal engagements, charitable funding, and expenditures. More than that, he promised protection. Protection for royal spouses, children, and those once swallowed by the machine's unforgiving grip. The monarchy must serve the people, he concluded, not enslave its own. The line echoed across television screens, headlines, and history books before the speech had even ended. It wasn't just a statement. It was a revolution wearing the face of royalty. But even as the crowd cheered and the world watched, one figure in the shadows vowed to undo everything William had just set in motion. Camilla had watched from the sidelines long enough. As William seized control, the queen consort prepared her final play, one rooted in ancient tradition, personal vengeance, and a secret alliance that could unravel everything. She knew how the game worked. She had climbed the ranks not by birth but by survival. And now, with the monarchy on the verge of transformation, she saw her influence slipping away. William's declaration had not only threatened centuries of royal structure, it had stripped Camilla of her unspoken power. The corridors that once echoed with deference were now filled with whispers of revolution. But Camilla was no stranger to being underestimated. She understood that when the crown shifts, it's not the loudest who win. It's the most calculated. And so, she moved quietly, but with deadly precision. Her first move was to reassemble the old guard. Former Windsor loyalists, those whose titles had grown dusty with irrelevance, were summoned through discreet letters and hushed invitations. Some had served the late Queen, others had walked away in protest of Charles's modern leanings. But all of them shared one thing in common: a deep disdain for disruption. They were relics of tradition, and Camilla promised them one final chance to preserve it. With them at her side, she began planting seeds, casting doubts about William's judgment, whispering questions about his stability, his motives, his ability to lead. Then came the dossier, a private document strategically leaked to a royal biographer with a history of palace ties. It contained a slew of allegations, claims that William had bypassed royal protocol, hidden critical information from his father, and manipulated public perception to create a false crisis. The press devoured it, and though none of the claims were officially verified, the damage was done. Suspicion had been introduced, and that was all Camilla needed. Doubt, once seated in the public's mind, was nearly impossible to erase. Behind the scenes, her strategy deepened. She held a secret meeting with senior members of the church and long-standing monarchists, those who still viewed the monarchy as a divine institution. There, she made her boldest move yet, urging them to call on Charles to return to full public duty, despite his health. She framed it as an act of unity, a necessary step to guide the monarchy through unprecedented uncertainty. But it was clear what she truly wanted: to retake the throne by proxy, using Charles as the face of a restoration and herself as the mind behind it. Meanwhile, Catherine received a chilling message. Not a direct threat, but something far more sinister. A royal intermediary passed along a thinly veiled warning: stability is fragile when one forgets where they came from. The implication was unmistakable. The gloves were off. The old monarchy would not go quietly, and anyone standing in the way would feel its weight. What had begun as a quiet transition of power had now erupted into a shadow war. A battle not of weapons, but of wills. Tradition versus change. past versus future. Camilla was not simply trying to stop William, she was preparing to erase him. As the battle lines were drawn, one final event loomed, one that would either cement William's reign or erase it entirely. The stage was set for William's symbolic coronation, not as king, but as the future's architect. But what was meant to be a moment of triumph quickly turned into a powder keg. Someone had a final move left, and the monarchy's fate would hinge on one decision made live before the world. The world held its breath as Westminster prepared for the most anticipated royal event in a generation. This wasn't a coronation in the traditional sense. There would be no crown placed upon his head, no throne officially passed down. This was William's declaration of vision and address to the nation, meant to solidify his new order. A monarchy redefined not by lineage, but by merit and purpose. Behind the scenes, however, a different story was unfolding. An intense security operation enveloped the site, far exceeding the standard royal detail. Military personnel, counterintelligence agents, and emergency response teams were deployed quietly but strategically. The whispers had begun days before someone was planning to intervene. Only hours before William's speech, a confidential message intercepted by palace intelligence set the palace into silent alarm. It warned of a royal betrayal during the event, cryptically signed and routed through a channel once used by senior monarchist loyalists. The message lacked specifics, but the implications were devastating. Someone from within the family circle intended to disrupt the moment. Everyone knew who it had to be: Camilla. Yet no one dared speak her name aloud. If she was coming, it wouldn't be with permission. It would be a coup in pearls. As the world watched and cameras rolled, William approached the podium. Just before he could speak, the tension in the room snapped. Queen Camilla appeared unannounced, flanked by two former members of Charles's inner circle. She made no attempt at subtlety. Her intention was clear: this was her last stand. She called for order, invoking centuries of tradition, accusing William of abandoning duty and dishonoring the bloodline. Gasps rippled across the room, the silence sharp and staggering. But before William could respond, another voice rose, steady, calm, and undeniable. Catherine stepped forward. No script. No teleprompter. Just the clarity of a woman who had endured too much to remain silent any longer. She addressed the nation not as a royal, but as a mother, a wife, and a citizen. She spoke of the crown's responsibility, of the weight it places on those too young to carry it, and of the courage it takes to reshape something so deeply rooted in fear. She didn't defend William, she affirmed the people. Her words were neither grand nor poetic. They were real, raw, and they shattered whatever illusion of power Camilla still thought she held. The crowd erupted, not in applause, but in unity. People outside the gates echoed her words. Online, support for William surged to record levels. Camilla, visibly shaken, had no choice but to withdraw. There was no authority left to wield. The old guard had lost its grip, and the new age had begun not with force, but with truth. And so, with a crown not yet placed but a kingdom forever changed, William stood tall, not as the king the monarchy expected, but as the leader it could no longer deny. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.